I used to think I knew what love was. I was wrong. Love, as it turns out, can be a lot of things. Beautiful, exciting, all-consuming. It can also be a lie. A carefully constructed, perfectly maintained lie. That's what Sarah taught me. She was a walking, talking, breathtaking lie, and I fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. We were 8 months in when the truth started to seep out, like poison from a hidden wound. All thanks to her little, sleep-talking problem. She said it was nothing to worry about. Turns out, it was everything. Sarah was stunning. The kind of woman who turns heads on the street. Long, dark hair that cascaded down her back, those captivating blue eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a smile that could melt glaciers. And she was smart too. Seriously intelligent. She could debate you under the table on just about any topic, and her dry wit was sharper than a tack. We met at a mutual friend's party. Glitchy, I know, but from the moment our eyes met, I was a goner. We started dating, and it was like something out of a movie. Romantic dinners, weekend getaways, long conversations that stretched late into the night. Everything just clicked. 8 months in, I was already picturing our future together. White picket fence, kids, the whole deal. I was in love. Deeply, hopelessly in love. Looking back, maybe the warning signs were there all along. Subtle, easy to miss, but there. The first one came on our 4th date. We were cuddled up on her impossibly clean couch, seriously. Her apartment was always immaculate, sipping wine, and she casually dropped a bomb. "I should probably warn you about something," she said, swirling the red liquid in her glass. "Oh," I replied, already smitten. "And what's that?" "I'm not exactly a quiet sleeper," she confessed, a slight smirk playing on her lips. I chuckled, thinking she was exaggerating. "Don't worry, I've shared a bed with industrial-grade snorers. I think I can handle it." She shook her head, her dark hair brushing against her cheek. "It's more than just snoring. I talk in my sleep. Sometimes I thrash around. I've even been known to, slap people." "Slap people, huh?" I teased, finding the whole thing rather amusing. "Sounds like I'm taking my life into my own hands here." She gave me this look, a strange mix of amusement and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher at the time. "Just saying," she said. "It's happened before. You've been warned." I laughed it off. It sounded harmless enough, quirky even. I thought it was cute. God, I was an idiot. The first time I stayed over, I half expected to get a black eye. I was almost anticipating it, just so I could tease her about her violent sleep self. But that first night was pretty uneventful. Some tossing and turning, a few mumbled words I couldn't understand, "Not the blue one," and "Don't let it drop," were the only phrases I caught. Nothing alarming. But then, over the next few weeks, her sleep talking became more frequent and more intense. One night, I woke up to a sharp smack on my chest. "Oh, what the hell?" I mumbled, disoriented and rubbing my chest. Sarah was still asleep, her arm lying limply across the bed. The next morning, over breakfast, I brought it up. "So, you kind of assaulted me in your sleep last night," I said, trying to make light of it. She almost spit out her coffee, her eyes wide with mock horror. "I did what?" "Yeah, full-on smack to the chest. Must have been dreaming about winning a boxing match or something." She laughed, a little too quickly, maybe. "Maybe I was dreaming about Mark," she said. Mark, her ex-husband. She rarely spoke about him, but from what I gathered, their divorce had been less than amicable. The way she said his name, that hint of venom in her voice, made me wonder what really happened between them. But I didn't pry. "It's no big deal," I said, waving it off. "Just try to aim for the pillows next time, okay?" I thought I was being funny, supportive, understanding. I was just being naive. A few weeks later, she brought it up again as we were getting into bed. You know I wasn't kidding about the sleep talking, right? She asked, her voice serious. Yeah, I know, I said, already half asleep myself. It's fine, really. Kind of endearing in a weird way. Her smile seemed a little strained. Just don't freak out if I say something strange, okay? I reached for her hand and gave it a squeeze. Sarah, nothing you say in your sleep is going to freak me out. You're amazing, and a little sleep talking isn't going to change that. She smiled again, but this time, that strange look from before was back in her eyes. The one I couldn't quite place. Now I know what it was. It was a warning. A warning I was too stupid to heed. So, after the chest-smacking incident, as I now jokingly referred to it, things seemed to settle down for a bit. Sarah's sleep-talking became less frequent, less violent. I started to relax, to think maybe it wasn't such a big deal after all. I was even starting to get used to her nocturnal mumblings. Most of the time, it was just random stuff, the kind of nonsense everyone spouts in their sleep. Put that down, she'd say, or jet the cat. Just your average, everyday sleep gibberish. I'd even chuckle about it in the mornings, and she'd just roll her eyes and laugh along. But then, things started to change. The content of her sleep talking took a darker turn. A much darker turn. It was about a month into our regular sleepovers when it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, not to a slap or a kick, but to a chillingly calm voice. It's under the oak tree, Sarah murmured, her voice low and steady, almost like she was reciting something. I blinked, groggy and confused. Sarah, I whispered, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. She didn't respond. She was completely still, her breathing slow and even. She was definitely asleep. I sat up, leaning closer, trying to make sense of what she'd said. What's under the oak tree? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nothing. She didn't say another word. She just rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around her, and continued to sleep soundly. I, on the other hand, lay there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. The next morning, over breakfast, I decided to bring it up. I tried to sound casual, like it was just another one of her funny sleep-talking episodes. Hey, you said something kind of weird in your sleep last night, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Sarah looked up, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Oh yeah? What did I say this time? Did I finally reveal my secret identity as a superhero? Not quite, I said, forcing a chuckle. You said, it's under the oak tree. Sound familiar? She tilted her head, her brow furrowed in thought, like she was genuinely trying to remember. Under the oak tree. That's random. Maybe I was dreaming about a picnic or something, or a treehouse. Do you remember anything about the dream? I pressed, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. She shook her head. Nope. My dreams are usually all over the place. You know how it is. I nodded, but her answer didn't sit right with me. It felt dismissive, too easy, like she was trying to brush it off, to change the subject. There was something about the way she said it, the way she avoided my gaze, that made me uneasy. A week later, I woke up to find her pacing around the bed like she was measuring the room, her steps deliberate and precise. Sarah, I whispered, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. She didn't answer. She acted like she hadn't even heard me. I reached for the bedside lamp, my hand hovering over the switch. As soon as my fingers brushed against it, she stopped dead in her tracks. Don't, she said sharply, her voice cutting through the silence. My hand froze. Don't what? She didn't respond. For a moment she just stood there rigid, like a statue, and then, Slowly, she climbed back into bed. Her movements were stiff, almost robotic. It was seriously creeping me out. The next morning, I didn't say anything. I wanted to ask her about the pacing, about what she'd said, but something told me not to. Something told me to keep quiet. And then things got worse. Much worse. One night, she sat bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide open, staring at something I couldn't see. And she started talking again. 2 miles from the highway, she said, her voice calm and even, devoid of any emotion. It works better when the ground is wet. I didn't even try to wake her this time. I just lay there, paralyzed with fear, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every muscle in my body was tense, every nerve on high alert. I felt like I was in a horror movie. When she finally settled back down, curling up on her side as if nothing had happened, I slipped out of bed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pour myself a glass of water in the kitchen. What the hell was going on with her? What did it all mean? And why was I so terrified of finding out? The breaking point. The moment I knew something was seriously wrong came a few nights after the 2 miles from the highway incident. I woke up to find Sarah sitting at the edge of the bed, her back to me, her silhouette outlined by the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds. "I told you it wouldn't work," she whispered, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear her. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. She didn't turn around. She didn't even acknowledge me. Her head was tilted slightly, as if she were listening to someone I couldn't see, someone who wasn't there. "He said he'd take care of it," she continued, her voice taking on a chillingly detached tone. "But he didn't. Now it's my problem." "Sarah, who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice louder this time, fear and confusion swirling inside me. She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up and walked towards the bedroom door, her movements fluid and silent, like a ghost gliding across the floor. I didn't follow her. I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my mind reeling, trying to process what I'd just heard. I listened as her footsteps faded down the hallway, the faint creak of the floorboards, the only sound in the otherwise silent apartment. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my body rigid with fear, my mind racing. When I finally crawled out of bed the next morning, the sun was already high in the sky. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she flipped pancakes, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just been whispering cryptic threats to an invisible person in the middle of the night. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, flashing me that dazzling smile that used to make my heart melt. Now, it just made me feel sick to my stomach. I forced a smile, trying to act normal, but my insides were churning. "Morning," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. I couldn't eat. I just sat there, pushing the pancakes around my plate, my mind replaying her words over and over again. He said he'd take care of it, but he didn't. Now it's my problem. What did it mean? Who was, and what was it? The next few days were a blur of anxiety and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I kept replaying Sarah's words in my head, trying to find some logical explanation, some way to dismiss it all as just a bad dream. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Then came the night I realized I was living a real-life horror story. Sarah fell asleep quickly that night, curled up on her side, her breathing slow and regular. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself. Everything seemed normal until I heard her voice. At first, I thought she was talking to me. "I held his nose shut," she said, clear as day. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Her voice was low, cold, almost monotone. He didn't take long. He kicked for a while, but then he stopped. I turned to her, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah was still lying on her side, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. She was definitely asleep. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't respond. She just kept talking, her voice a chilling whisper in the darkness. "Dragged him down the embankment," she continued. "The soil was soft, perfect for digging." "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, a wave of nausea washing over me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, staring at Sarah's sleeping form, my mind reeling with horror and disbelief. What had I gotten myself into? Who was this woman sleeping beside me? And what had she done? The next morning, I confronted her. I had to. I couldn't live with this gnawing fear, this sickening suspicion, any longer. "You were talking in your sleep again last night," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I poured myself a cup of coffee, avoiding her eyes. Sarah glanced up from her phone, looking more annoyed than concerned. "No, not again," she said with a chuckle. What nonsensical wisdom did I impart this time? Did I finally reveal the secret to eternal youth? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. You said something about suffocating someone," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. And digging a grave." Her smile vanished. She stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she shrugged. "Sounds like a nightmare," she said, her voice flat. "Probably just watched too many crime shows before bed. You know how I love my Netflix." She laughed, but it was a hollow, forced sound that did nothing to ease the growing dread in my gut. It felt rehearsed, like a line she'd practiced. "You don't remember anything about it?" I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shook her head. "Nope. Honestly, Chris, I never remember my dreams. They're just gone when I wake up." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, but inside I was screaming. This wasn't just a dream. It couldn't be. It was too detailed, too specific, too real. A few nights later, I woke up to her voice again, and this time, she said a name. "Max Carter," she murmured, her voice calm and detached, like she was reading a grocery list. I sat up in bed, my skin crawling. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, to run as far away as possible. "She's behind the old barn," she continued, her voice a chilling whisper in the darkness. "The one with the blue door." The name, it sounded familiar. Where had I heard it before? Then it hit me. Max Carter. He was a local guy who'd gone missing a few years back while on a camping trip. I remembered seeing his face on the news, on missing posters plastered all over town. His case was still unsolved. The police had never found him. The next morning, I didn't say anything to Sarah. I couldn't. I didn't know what to say. How do you confront someone you love, someone you thought you knew, with the possibility that they might be a murderer? But I couldn't get the name, Max Carter, or her words. "Behind the old barn, the one with the blue door," out of my head. I had to do something. I needed to know if there was any truth to what she was saying. I spent the next few hours on my phone, frantically searching for any information I could find about Max Carter's disappearance. The online news articles, the old missing person reports, they all painted a grim picture. He'd vanished without a trace. There was no mention of a barn or a blue door in any of the reports, but the area where he'd last been seen. It was in the next county over, a rural area with lots of farmland and barns. A few days later, fueled by a terrifying mix of fear and morbid curiosity, I did something I knew I probably shouldn't do. I suggested to Sarah as casually as I could that we take a drive. "Just for a change of scenery," I said. She was smiling when I suggested it. Her smile wavered just a bit. Veer to? Just out to the countryside. Maybe towards Brownsville, I said, naming the town closest to where Max Carter had last been seen. Get some fresh air, da. She looked at me, her blue eyes searching mine. Why Brownsville? I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. I don't know. Just feel like a drive. She agreed, a little too quickly, and that knot in my stomach tightened. Later, while she was getting ready, I worked up the courage to ask, have you ever thought about doing a sleep study? Her movements stilled. She turned to me, her expression hardening. Why would I do that, Chris? I don't know. I stammered, my heart pounding. Just you've been saying some pretty strange things in your sleep. Maybe it's stress or something. I'm fine, she said, her voice cold and clipped. You're overthinking this. Maybe we could just record you then, I suggested, trying a different tactic, just so you can hear it for yourself. Her reaction was immediate and fierce. No, absolutely not. That's a huge invasion of privacy. I wasn't trying to. If you ever record me without my permission, Chris, we're done. I mean it. Her eyes, usually so warm and inviting, were now like ice. I nodded quickly, backing down immediately. Okay, forget I said anything. But I didn't forget. How could I? That night, after she fell asleep, I did what I knew I shouldn't do. I carefully propped my phone up on her nightstand, the microphone angled towards her, and hit record. The next morning, while Sarah was in the shower, I listened to the recording. Most of it was just static, the rustling of sheets, the hum of the air conditioner. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard it, her voice clear as a bell. Nina screamed too much, she murmured. Fast. Had to move fast. No mistakes. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Nina, another name, another missing person. This time, a teenager, Nina Tully. Her disappearance 5 years ago had been all over the local news. This couldn't be happening. It just couldn't be. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know. I had to see for myself. Later that day, I made an excuse to get out of the house, leaving Sarah behind. I told her I needed to run some errands. She didn't question me. I drove. I drove for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I followed the directions I'd pieced together from the old news reports and Sarah's sleep talking, my sense of dread growing with every mile. Finally, I found it. An old, dilapidated barn, set back from the road, just like she'd said. And the door, it was painted a faded, chipped blue. It was just like she'd described it. My legs felt like lead as I approached the barn, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The air was thick with the smell of decay, a sickeningly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. Behind the barn, nestled among a cluster of trees, was a patch of disturbed earth. It looked like someone had been digging there recently. I told myself to turn around, to go back to the car, to call the police. But I couldn't. Something compelled me to keep going, to see what was hidden beneath the freshly turned soil. I knelt down and started to dig, using a broken branch I found nearby. The earth was soft, damp, just like she'd said. I didn't have to dig for long. The smell hit me first, a pungent, unmistakable stench of death. Then I saw it. A piece of fabric, tattered and stained with dirt and something darker, something that looked horrifyingly like dried blood, and beneath it bones. I stumbled back, gagging, my mind reeling in horror. It was real. It was all real. Sarah wasn't just talking in her sleep. She was confessing. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't just leave those bones, that evidence, out in the open. I scrambled back to my car, my mind racing, my body trembling uncontrollably. I drove, not back to Sarah, but straight to the nearest police station, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. But when I got there, when I walked through those doors and saw the officers behind the counter, I froze. What was I going to say? My girlfriend talks in her sleep, and she led me to a shallow grave. They'd think I was crazy. They'd probably lock me up, and without the recordings, without any proof other than a few fragmented sentences whispered in the dead of night, I had nothing. Less than nothing. I had a story so wild, so unbelievable, it would probably do more harm than good. So, I ran. I turned around and walked out of that station, got back in my car, and drove. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get as far away from Sarah, from that barn, from everything, as possible. I ended up in a cheap motel in a town I'd never heard of, paying cash for a room and collapsing on the bed, fully clothed, too exhausted and terrified to even think about sleeping. The next day, I bought a burner phone, a cheap, disposable thing that I could use without being traced. I tried accessing my cloud storage, hoping, praying that maybe, just maybe, the recordings had backed up, that there was some evidence, some proof of what Sarah had said. But there was nothing. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence I had painstakingly collected, it was all gone. Deleted. Erased. She must have found a way to access my account. She must have known. A wave of cold dread washed over me. She was always smarter than me. For weeks, I lived like a ghost, drifting from one town to the next, always looking over my shoulder, terrified that Sarah would find me. I avoided social media, knowing she could use it to track me down. The only connection I had to the outside world was the news. Every morning, I'd scour the local news sites, my heart in my throat, praying I wouldn't see her face, or worse, hear about another body being discovered. At first, there was nothing. No new missing persons, no unsolved murders. A sliver of hope started to flicker within me. Maybe, just maybe, I'd scared her enough to stop. Maybe by running, by disappearing, I'd somehow put an end to it all. But that hope was short-lived. The killings started again. A man found strangled in his apartment, miles away from where I was hiding. Then a woman's body pulled from a lake in a neighboring state. The details were sparse, but the day they were killed, it was eerily similar to the things Sarah had described in her sleep. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that it had to be. But deep down I knew. I knew it was her. Then came the news that shattered me completely. A young woman, barely out of her teens, went missing from a town not far from where I grew up. Her name was Riley. My cousin Riley. We weren't close, not anymore, but we'd spent our childhood summers together. I remembered her infectious laugh, her bright smile, the way she used to light up every room she walked into. When I saw her face on the news, heard the reporter say her body had been found in a shallow grave, I felt like the world was collapsing around me. They didn't give many details, but I knew. I knew where they'd found her. Beneath the roots of an oak tree, just like Sarah had said all those weeks ago. The guilt was crushing. It was like a physical weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. If I had gone to the police sooner, if I had told them what I knew, maybe Riley would still be alive. Maybe all those other victims would still be alive. But I hadn't. I'd been a coward. I'd run away. And now, it was too late. I can't keep running. I can't keep hiding. I don't care if no one believes me. I don't care if they lock me up and throw away the key. I have to do something. I have to try. So, this is it. This is my confession. My warning. Her name is Sarah Miller. She's beautiful, intelligent, charming. And she's a monster. She's confessed to everything in her sleep. Max Carter, Nina Tully, and all the others. She told me how she did it, where she buried them. I thought they were just nightmares. God, how I wish they were just nightmares. But they weren't. I found one of the bodies. I dug where she said to dig, and there he was. I tried to run, to escape, but it didn't work. She's still out there. And now, she knows I know. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't know when she'll find me. But I had to tell someone. I had to get the truth out there. There's a noise outside my door. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps. My hands are shaking. I can barely hold the phone I bought to type this out on. She's here. If anyone finds this, if anyone reads this, please believe me and stop her before she kills again.